listening?
This is the Rob Scott Show.
Damn.
I mean, really, like, if we're not trying to change the world, what are we doing?
Yeah.
All right, welcome to the Rob Scott Show. How are you? What's up, Sarah?
It's good to see you. I am really excited to be recording this with you.
Yeah?
I think we have some good stuff to talk about today, and
Yeah.
I'm just glad to be back at it with you.
Yeah,
This is
let's
fun
do
for
it.
me.
You had a couple things that I think seemed interesting to get into. So what do you?
Yeah, so on this episode, I would love to kind of share with our listeners about the fundamental shift. We kind of talk, we've talked about this throughout our podcast, but especially more recently. And I don't kind of want to dig into it and kind of give our listeners a preview, and also kind of set the foundation for other conversations that I hope to have with you, ongoing through the podcast, but really kind of putting a definition around what we have called the fundamental shift, and then kind of discussing the magic of it. So kind of giving everyone a little bit of the sneak peek of the training that we've been talking about, and should be posted soon, and just kind of batting this idea around with you, and hopefully other people can find it as beneficial as we have.
I think that's awesome. So to put it in context, if there's three big stages that we want to help the world do, is to really get this thing called the fundamental shift, which has immediate benefits, but it also has long-term benefits, right? So it's good. A concept there that's interesting is kind of wake up and grow up, right? So
Right.
there is a benefit that can happen in an instant in some ways, and then the application of that through your life and in your habits and stuff is more like grow up and over time. So there's instant change and then change over time. But we want this fundamental shift, which we'll dive into today. And then after you get that, we can really work on the identity portion of what we do, which is really like yourself over time, growing, how do you manage yourself, et cetera. And then our big hope is that that can go into societal change, and how do we change culture in the world in incredibly positive ways, right? That would be the intention behind everything. But it really centers around this fundamental shift, this sort of starting point that if you did nothing else would be deeply valuable. But it's also the seed to a whole lot more change should you want to go that way, right? So I know you, Sarah, really deeply understand the fundamental shift in interesting ways. I mean, what about it is interesting to you? Like, how do you want me to like reveal this? How should we talk about it?
Sure. Well, I was going to say, just to kind of stop you at the wake up and grow up. And, I think about all the things that we have in life and all the choices and all the whatever. And I think it's very special when you come across something that not only gives you that instant immediate benefit, but then continues to get bigger over time. Because when I think of most things in our life, concepts, books, movies, foods, we get this like quick hit of, oh my gosh, that's awesome. And then it gets boring over time, or it gets, it fades to the background over time. And this is really truly something that it's like, the more that you dig in, the richer the experience of it is. And that, like, I just want to call that part out alone, because I think that's really kind of, those are rare. And I just think that I know that I have an understanding of what the fundamental shift is. I know that we both have an experience with it. You have it defined. We have it in our courses, but I just kind of wanted to be very like open and blunt with it for the podcast, for this recording, and just say like kind of what it is exactly.
Yeah. So
and start there.
Let me like back up really quick. So we keep talking about time, right? And one thing is sort of like, can something happen now? And then what happens with it over time? And time is actually quite fundamental in the fundamental shift, right? It is very much this sort of escape out of time and into now in a meaningful way, specifically with our attention. And through that, a lot of the structures that make our thinking and our experiencing of the world complex and difficult and emotionally challenging and all that can and do kind of immediately dissolve. And from there, you can almost like wipe the slate clean and kind of begin again in a meaningful way. And this is deeply profound, but it doesn't have to be. Like it's also, it can be deeply simple as well. But just an aside on time, and I'm going to apologize for something that Sarah invited before we started recording. She goes, I think she said something like, let's get weird sometimes about this. So like, let me do a side tangent on weirdness. Time is physics and science and everything looking at time it is weirder than many other things in the universe, right? In against all the other laws of physics, like it's the only one that actually has directionality. And there's different reasons for this, things like entropy and other stuff. But the past is unlike the future, right? There's no, our physical understanding of physics presently, there's no reason that's totally clear or understandable about why time has a direction. And it should theoretically be the same to go forward in time as backward in time, but it's not. It has a real directionality. There's like an arrow to this. So that's really interesting. Subjectively, like just internally of time, there's no way to get to the future or the past outside of this concept of imagination, right? So we actually subjectively and personally, we're imagining time all the time. And what I mean by that is if you think about the future, you have to imagine it. Like you can't just go there. You're always meaningfully in this moment. And yet we get this sense of passage of time. And obviously we have a history and we have memory and all this stuff. And so it's complex and it's weird. And without considering it, it seems very obvious. It's like, oh, there's a past and there's a future. And we're all like settled in that. But psychologically, what that feeling of time does to us is deeply dramatic. Our whole sense of self is a collection of our memories about ourselves. And as we kind of bring any self to the moment, we're a collection of our whole history of, whatever we've done in the past or things we believe have happened to us or what we've learned in the past, et cetera. And so in a certain sense, who you are today is not the same as who you'll be a week from now, because another week will have passed and you will have learned more things and have more time. So there's this collective sense of you over time. And then in our future, in our imagination, we're constantly like desiring and fearing the future and doing all these things. So in the normal everyday sense of life, we feel like that's just what it is. That's just what's going on. But there's this meaningful shift out of the time realm and into what is actually grounded in much more reality just than your personal thinking about reality, into the reality that we share, which is this moment, right? And so this attentional move out of thinking about and modeling time into noticing what's actually happening in this moment is one simple way to describe the fundamental shift. Now, that doesn't sound exciting. It doesn't sound like what's in it for me? Why would I want to do that? Whatever's going on. But if we don't do that, we end up being lost in time in these very weird ways. We end up having this sense of becoming, this feeling of I'm not there yet. This isn't enough yet. I don't like this. I don't like that. And time isn't the only thing that the fundamental shift plays with. It also plays with good and bad, opinions, judgments, meaning making, all these different things that are happening in our cognition. And there's a reset button in any moment and every moment that you choose to do it, which is to drop all that modeling of time and preference and judgments and all these things and come into this moment meaningfully. And so I'll stop. That's a lot of babble, but does that confuse the whole thing, Sarah, do you think, or does that?
I don't think so. And, as Rob said, the fundamental shift is both something that's, deeply profound, but also not, can be also deeply simple. And I think that's why it's so fun and why I've been so excited to talk about it here with you. Because to me, this ability to, shift out of your perspectives, your meaning, kind of, do exactly what you said, shift out of even like a time and just be really aware of more reality. I'll say reality in air quotes, than ever before is actually, well, it doesn't sound cool, is kind of super cool. And it makes me think of things like, the Matrix or Inception, or these kind of concepts where we're like, oh, what's real and what's not real. And then discovering that we actually have the agency to create a reality that is real, right?
Yeah.
Because it's more real than what you're saying, imagination. It's more real than,
or ground back into reality rather than create it. It's almost like a noticing of it. So I would say that the human condition, simply put, I'll try and put it simply, is that we are not in reality. We're actually mostly in delusion. And this has to do with I just keep calling it modeling, but you could also call it thinking. You could also call it simulating, right? One of the wonderful powers of being human is that we can simulate what we would like to be. We can simulate the future. We can actually, our memories about the past are simulations, right? When I go back and imagine myself at 5 years old or last week or whatever, I'm creating some type of simulation in my head. So I call that modeling, simulating, thinking, right? All these have very similar meanings in how I'm saying it. Most people, and the human condition is that we are modeling, and we're doing it in a way that is not accurate. Number one, it's not leading to our best personal outcomes. It's not leading to cooperating really well with others. And it is actually really far away from reality. It is into every single one of us personal movie about ourselves and the world and what's right and what's wrong, et cetera. And so in that, we're approaching 8 billion of us, or whatever the population is today. And there's a lot of difference and disagreements, and we can't ground in or, even find empathy. And, that gets more and more challenging as we're all watching different social media, et cetera, but we're splitting rather than kind of grounding back together. And so on the individual level, to get out of your own delusion and more into reality, which is quite literally the space around you and what's actually happening outside of your modeling about it. I talk about thinking and experience, just coming into experience instead, simplifies everything, gets you out of this delusional meaning making that may be going on for you. But then also we can meet other people there and have sane cooperation, or I should say more sane, cooperating and meeting in reality, quite literally in reality, rather than in our own simulations and fantasies about the world.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I think about like this idea that we're modeling, and most of our, I can't wait for you guys to see this training. It is full of so many good stuff, but one of the things that kind of we dive into is this idea that like thought space versus material space, and really like looking at what is, what our world, what our life, what our consciousness is kind of made up of. And one of the things that I have found interesting as of lately, all of this is interesting, but kind of the idea that's been sticking with me is that the power of the fun. So if everything is, I'll try to say this precisely, we'll see how I do. If everything that we're doing is modeling, and we're aware that we're modeling, we're winning that game, right? I am modeling my best version of self. I'm matching my values. I'm eating right. I'm relating well. Standing, I'm winning that, right? I'm doing that really well. A lot of people, especially people that kind of come and work with us as coaches or do personal development, there's a part that they're like, I'm not doing something well, right? I need a new model for it. And what we find is that through coaching and coaching techniques, or you'll see this in therapy, that other people can help you create better models, right? Which is awesome. That has a benefit, that's gives people a result. But doing this with the within the arena of having a fundamental shift, it's not somebody else creating a different model for you. It's you being able to step outside of perspectives, outside of modeling, outside of meaning, outside of thinking, and then see it in its entirety, right? Like, which gives you instantly more wisdom, more power, more control, whatever. And then choose, okay, do I need extra help to kind of build better models? Do I want to go a different direction? Do I want to flip meanings? Like, all of a sudden you have all this agency, which is it's kind of a nuanced difference between having somebody just create a different model from you.
Mm-hmm.
But my point is, and I said this to you kind of right before we hit record, so I'll try to say it again, is that I see how many areas of life where we are modeling without knowing it, right? It's other people's versions of truths that we have taken on as our truths, and we don't really understand why, right? If we dig in, why do we do the things we do? Some of it's biological, some of it's cultural, some of it's society, some of it's how we're raised. But we'll start to see, oh my God, there's a ton of perspectives I'm carrying with me, some that I know, some that I don't know where they come, but like that aren't mine, that aren't
Mm-hmm.
something where I have like chosen to model it. I just am, right? And so that becomes almost frightening if you can all of a sudden see like, I really am not in as much control as I can. And what's so, and I think empowering to people that do this work, why I'm excited about it, why you love this, you've just dedicated your life to this, is that having that fundamental shift gives you power, and it gives you agency, and it gives you wisdom, but it doesn't and you all of a sudden don't become this person that people are taking advantage of, that marketing is taking advantage of, that AI is taking advantage of, that is at the whim of whatever the family drama is at the dinner table, or at the beck and call of like relationship issues. You're suddenly just like this firmer version of yourself, consciousness, thinking, whatever, because of the ability to just see that where it's happening, right? Just
Yeah.
to get that kind of awareness. And so
That was
I
really
love
well
that.
said. That was really
Thank you.
well said. Yeah, that was great. Like, wow, good job. That was like, I mean, really, like that was fantastic. I think that's right on. One way that I like to talk about it is it's meta in the way that it gets outside of modeling entirely. Okay,
Right.
so we talk a fair amount about beliefs, and I don't mean religious beliefs necessarily, but the assuredness of meaning. So as things are happening to you, and you're very sure that they're happening as you're perceiving them, that is your level of belief. And hopefully a lot of the time you're right, but many times we're wrong. We can be fooled by illusions. We can be fooled by personal beliefs, limiting beliefs about ourselves. There's all these like ways of doing that. And so I've had old friends come to me and go, well, Rob, you're just selling like a new belief. This is like a different belief. And I'm going, no, 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 no. We're putting under the microscope the whole structure of believing, right? This is not a new belief to take on. This is escaping the facility of your meaning making and your assuredness of each of those meanings, not to come to know meaning in a way that is life shattering, but in moment by moment realizing how much you're in control or not in control of that, right? So I've been talking about things as like forces lately, right? So if you're a human, there are forces that are acting on you, both physical and psychological and otherwise, right? And many of those are external to you. So gravity is having an effect on you. It's pulling you, toward the massive object of the earth and other things, right? There's forces of like, drives to go find the food out there. There's, a mate you might want to find or whatever, like all the animalistic physical things that a human has to do. There's lots of forces that are at play. Well, once we get up into the mind and into what we're doing inside our head, if we're not conscious of how much we're creating, a lot of our internal, the forces that are happening internal might as well be external to us. So what I mean by that is all of a sudden you feel anger, right? If you're not very self-aware and you don't know that you're participating in the creation of that anger with your own attachment and meaning making, it just feels like you're a victim to the anger. Like there's not much to do about it. I just am angry. It like takes you over. In a sense, if you feel hunger, you just kind of become a victim of this hunger, right? And so if you can't control that impulse at all of a sudden, if I'm hungry, I might just go eat, right? And we could describe that as somebody who's like, oh, if you're not in control at all, every whim of like wanting ice cream leads you to go eat more ice cream. That doesn't sound good. That's not like, you're not very agentic. You don't have a lot of control over what's going on. So what we do is when we wake up from this, we actually become really aware of like, how much am I creating my emotions, right? How much am I able to like feel hunger but not react to it? How much am I able to see when I feel like somebody thinks something about me, how much that like rattles me or not, right? And so the belief part of that is like, how attached am I once I have that sensation or force that's kind of acting on me, both internally or externally, when that's happening? How much am I like assured that that's just true, right? So when somebody comes up to me and they're like, no, 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 my boss said this and that means X, Y, Z, and they're so attached to it, I would say they're believing that really deeply.
Right.
The first move is like, don't believe it quite as much. Like, is there any other way to interpret that? Is there any other way to like move that around a little bit? But the multi-move here, because if we don't see the modeling of all of it happening through the fundamental shift, now you're playing this piecemeal game, which might be like mindset coaching or something, right? Like
Sure.
somebody comes in and goes, well, I'm going to change your business mindset so you can be whatever. It's like, cool. Well, now you're this sense of self, and maybe you instill some better mindsets about business that help or don't or whatever. And let's give them full credit. Maybe they work fantastically in
Sure.
business. you still haven't seen the mechanism of how you're doing that in every dimension of your life all the time, full stop, period. Like you haven't seen the human condition of what it is to be unconsciously a human versus a conscious human being, right? And an awake, conscious human being who can see the function of how they're reacting to the world and to their own impulses and to everything that's going on. And that singular move, that's why it's the fundamental shift, right?
Right.
Without that, we're lost in a self that might be winning at certain games, but it's like a game of whack-a-mole. As soon as you solve this, now you either want something else or there's a new problem that pops up. Like you might solve all your business problems, but to do that, you've ignored the relationships. And so now there's that problem. When you're looking at that, you can't deal with the business. And then you have a problem with your child. And then somebody gets sick in your family. And, you know, it's just like, it's constantly around. Getting out of the whole meaning making thing gives you agency in all these directions, a whole better way to relate to it. And so changing yourself in all these dimensions might be closer to what identity shifting is. And we want to be able to do that. But if that's not based meaningfully on this fundamental shift, you are still going to be kind of chasing your tail, right? So it's like, we got to get this fundamental shift first. And this is not something that's like only certain people can get, or you have to be this smart, or it has nothing to do with that. In fact, really smart people are often more lost in their lenses and theories and all that than people who are just regular old people, right? Like this has nothing to do with intelligence. There's no onboarding. Now, obviously, if you have brain damage or something, you know, like if you can't make meaning, if you can't understand language, like you know, this isn't going to work for you. But at any old level of understanding yourself, you can begin to get better at this. And it's a move in your attention. I mean, that's really where it is. That's where it starts.
Right. Well, and another concept that we talked about, you know, throughout building this training is, as you know, Rob and I have been really spending a lot of this year kind of brainstorming how to share this in the most meaningful and interesting way possible. And, you know, one of the things we kind of came to is there probably are people out there that feel good in almost every area. They don't want for a lot, and they have the money and the business and the relationship and the body and all the things that most of us are striving for. And that just the act of being a human being on planet Earth means that you are automatically subjected to a ton of factors that are outside your control, outside what you do in a therapist's office, what you do with a personal trainer or whatever with your boss. I mean, there are pandemics, there are wildfires, there are earthquakes, there are wars, there are technology. There's a million things outside of what we control as humans that can impact us. So if you're in a position where you feel like all your boxes are checked, that's great. Like, we want that, right? We want to create happy, fulfilled, healthy people. But when something comes and pulls the rug out under you, which I think we talked about before in the podcast too, if you don't have that skill, at least in your back pocket, or that tool in your toolbox, you know, where does that leave you? Like, genuinely, where does that leave that person who's all of a sudden they lost their home in a fire and it had all their business, and, you know, they have no way to feed their kids, and they're on the street? Like, it can happen outside of whatever we think we're doing or not doing. And so this kind of just kind of reach everybody, and it doesn't have to reach everybody in the same way, but it's definitely got something for everyone, which is why I think it's so incredible. And the other, sorry.
Go ahead. No, please.
I was just going to say, the other thing I wanted to respond to is this. I love thinking about the idea of beliefs, because one of the things, and this meaning, where the fundamental shift is your ability to kind of step outside of the belief-making structure and see kind of how and where and when that's happening. What it actually allows you to do, I think, is expand your beliefs, which is kind of what we all want to win at, right? We're all like, how do we get this perspective? How do we get these meanings? How do we become these people? But like, where the lie is, and where I was saying, like, where I feel like a lot of us can get taken advantage if we can't do this, is that we get stuck on one thing, and it almost like fills us up in the sense that we can't even see other things. So the beauty of like being able to step out of it completely is that when you come back, you almost have like an infinite capacity for believing, even though I know that's not our favorite word, but in my perspective,
well, let's say meaning making. Right?
Sure. You have an infinite capacity to hold a million meanings, making them right or wrong or whatever. But like, where where we're getting it wrong is we're like, so like, I'm trying to think of a good example. Like, you know, the one that comes to mind is I'm Republican, I'm Democrat.
Right.
Right? Like, how limited are you? You can still hold the belief that you're one thing, but don't let that like turn off everything else because you're in blinders because you're like, I
Hmm.
don't know, I'm in this kind of perspective game. Like,
Yeah.
see where that's happening and then be like, I am also this, but like it just that's
Yeah, I'm
why in the
also
beginning
human.
we
I'm also
said,
partner. I'm also business
right,
owner. I'm also friend. I'm also like, there's 1,000 other things. And then we can have wisdom about, oh, everybody
right.
too.
Well, that's why we said in the beginning, it's that one thing, right?
Yeah.
And then it grows. And I said,
Hmm.
that's so cool because most things are one thing and then they fizzle out.
Yeah.
But this has like an infinite capacity to like transform your experience in life.
Yeah. This is actually, it is the foundational thing underneath every direction, time. Like it is the center. It really is the center of the whole thing. And what's actually outside of the fundamental shift, quite literally, is yourself, like is your actual identity. Like, because your identity, yourself, is in time. Your identity does have goals. Your identity does have opinions and positions, etc. Now, the more fluid you are with those, there's advantages to that. The more slammed down you are, you know, that might be okay, you know, for some things, but notice the limits of that, right? Like the fanatic who's so assured of this is the way and we all need to be this way and all that, they're usually angry and they're usually not thriving in 1,000 other areas, and, you know, etc. But it's not just about that fluidity, because it doesn't mean that you can't take a position and really care about it. I don't want to like sell that the wrong way. But what's really important is that to change yourself, which would be what any kind of therapy or personal development or coaching or advice or whatever we'd want to do, all of that, like any book you buy, is to try to like learn stuff to get better, to grow, right? In whatever way that you're trying to do that. Yourself is doing that. But from within the self, the complexity of everything you desire, all the problems you think, all the different things, it's really hard to change you when you're persisting. And so here's another place where it gets weird. When you get a meaningful connection to the fundamental shift, that is quite literally the experience of no self, right? It's the experience of truly selflessness. It's actually the place where we begin in our model of self-transcendence, self-mastery, self-actualization. We transcend self first. And if that sounds weird to you, let me just explain that other forms of this are things like flow states. The experience of gratitude is beginning to transcend self, right? Where we're not so self-focused. Quite literally, like when you're eating a strawberry, if your full attention is on the strawberry and the experience of that, I'm going to argue there's no self there. Now, that might not make sense conceptually, because conceptually we carry a permanent self with us. But if I ask you, what is it to change? Like in one sentence, if I go, in one sense, if I say, hey, is your self permanent? There's a lot of people that would argue like, yes, I'm, you know, for me, I'm Rob and I've always been Rob and there's a permanence to that. And then I go, well, okay, well, what is it to change? Is that to change Rob in some way? Well, yes, okay, that's changing. Well, then Rob's not permanent. Rob's capable of change, etc. So just from that perspective alone, it's harder to change Rob as it is to get outside Rob and actually like see what's going on with Rob and change it from there, right? Then people go, well, how can I be anything but who I am? What I'm saying is that the Rob that you think you are, or I think I am, right, is a construction of my whole memory, my history. It's a bit of a story that I'm telling myself about myself. All right. And this is the weird part. You invited it, Sarah. So, you know, here we are. But the no self position, moment by moment, as we can kind of get out of that, it loosens our lock on what, I'll just keep saying Rob, what Rob is or is not, right? Rob's attachment to certain ideas, the permanence of how I expect it to be, what my goals are, all these things. I can get out of the attachment of it has to be this way, or I have to do this, or I've got to be this other thing. And I can actually reconsider all the meaning making around all those things and come back in as a very different version of myself, right? It's almost like resetting all my assumptions and all my beliefs and all my, you know, whole situation. And so that ability is other level. That is literally like a next level of consciousness that humans are deeply capable of, but we just don't know that we're capable of it. And it's not been clear sort of how to do that and how to use it. I don't think.
Yeah, and because this is kind of like you were saying, foundational to so many things, I hope that we get to kind of open all the doors that this leads to, right? Like I
Hmm.
feel like it's put me in a place where I'm like, oh my gosh, let's talk about this, let's talk about that, more than we can cover today. But just thinking about what you just said, I mean, to me, there's two parts to that. There's two reasons why, and I just want to drive this home so people are like, can really just see. And I hope selfishly, as excited as I am about what this can do, is in one sense, there are people that are dying right now to change. And
Hmm.
that maybe they came off of a breakup, or they, like are laid off from their job right now, or they are, whatever that is, they know, oh my gosh, I need to be a different self than I am now, or I want to be a different self, and I don't know how. So that right there, there's your answer.
Hmm.
The other side of people who are might be listening and saying, oh, this is weird, I like myself, I don't want to be anything different,
Hmm.
right, might at some point, or are maybe currently put in a position where their environment, as I was saying before, with external events and just being human on planet Earth, is forcing them to 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 alter with the what's happening, right?
Hmm.
And I don't mean that in a weird way. I guess I mean that in how the internet kind of changed the way that we interact with each other. I don't know, the automobile and the airplane changed how we travel. Like there are things that happen that change who we are
Yeah.
and how we identify and how we interact. And the other kind of people that I see suffering that are like not as obvious as the person who has the breakup or the person who lost their job, are the people that are like, everything around me is shifting and I can't
I don't know how to
evolve
adapt.
with it.
I don't know how to
Yeah,
adapt.
and so there's like, we talk about not just surviving but thriving, right? Like it's so twofold, because this gets you into a place where you can literally be surviving, but also it keeps you in a place where you can be thriving as well. And so
Hmm.
that's such a wide spectrum of use for human beings to kind of really get what this is,
Yeah.
and how they can have it for themselves.
I have three things that I don't want to forget to speak back to. So one is like the image of the first person whose life is just kind of going great. The second thing is, you reminded me of that when you said there's some people out there who might just go, I really like myself. And then the third thing is, I don't want to get off of this without, we know we're talking about it, but I feel like people listening might be like, well, just say it. Like, what is it? Like, all that. And one, we're trying to, right? Two, we could actually be more succinct about it, because there's talking about the benefits of it and it helps this, it helps that, but like, really, what is it, right? So, and again, our training is going to be much more helpful than any, off the cuff podcast we do, because we're being very thoughtful with that. But what I wanted to say about the first guy and the girl who likes her life or whatever, most people are going to be motivated to change because of pain or deep aspiration, which is also pain. So, this is obvious work if you're suffering, right? If just challenges are overwhelming, you don't know what to do. Like, those are the people that it is not hard to convince you to change, right? The other side of that are people who would say that they're very happy, but they're still like, I don't have enough, I'm not enough, I want to do more, I have a big purpose, I want to do that. And that's not as bad as suffering, but it's a different kind of suffering, because you still don't feel like life is what it should be. So you're trying to get somewhere good, but we might call that aspirational instead of, really suffering in some way. Those are the two shades. Suffering, probably the loudest one, where it's like, they're on board for whatever, therapy, coaching, this work, and they're just like, help, I'll take a lifeline. And then you have all the average people, which might be in a couple of categories, probably more categories than this, but two that come to mind are the really self-sufficient ones that are doing great. And you were making a point that this is good for them also. I'm going to make the point that they're probably not going to be deeply motivated to do this because it's working out for them. Why would you, if you don't need to change, why change? So we usually don't change what's working, right? It's like, life is going well. But I think for more and more and more of us in the complexity, it is what our brain is doing, like what this is here for, is to adapt to complexity, right? That's what our whole thinking and being able to move and affect the world around us and all these things, we are trying to survive through the complexity that's coming at us. And we're seeing that the complexity is getting faster and faster and faster and more diverse all the time. And I don't want to be alarmist with that. It just is. Like, we're having more people and more options and more challenges, and we're global now, and it's just it's a little crazier. The challenges are different and at a different pace than they were 500 years ago. There were different challenges 500 years ago. But the point is, the brain has to keep adapting to that. So people that may have been fantastic 10 years ago are now going like, what's happening? I don't even understand where to trust the news or whatever's going on. And so they're not sure how to adapt, even though they might be really successful and together and attractive and look great on Instagram or whatever. But inside they're kind of going, I don't get the point. Like, what's the meaning? What am I doing here? All that. So if it's great today and you don't have to do any work, you're probably not even listening right now. Like, good for you. And I really mean good for you. But for our cultures to work better, this is a level of consciousness that more and more and more of us are going to have to understand to manage the complexity that we're going to be facing now and in the future. So this is truly like, for years and years, I've said this is the next level of human consciousness. It truly is that. And you're not left behind if you don't get it, but I'm telling you that in the collective, more of us are going to have to get it if we want to adapt to the complexity that is on the horizon in the form of various existential threats, AI, et cetera. Now, I said there were a couple categorizations of the people who maybe aren't suffering and maybe aren't, aspiring. And we talked about a pretty well-adjusted kind of person. There's also people that just don't even know they have a problem, right? They're just deeply unconscious and dysfunctional. Maybe they're some form of addict. Maybe they're, just, thinking all the time and they don't even know they're thinking and whatever. They're not looking to personal development necessarily, and that's okay. And that could be a great, huge number of people in the world who just have no care to do this. They don't really want to cooperate any better. They don't want to do anything. And I've had a lot of people kind of bring up, well, how would we ever get them to change? And here's the thing, they don't all have to change. Like, they're fine, right? They change if you want to. Oftentimes those people aren't serious people of power or anybody that would in any grand way threaten anybody else or whatever. Like, they don't have to get it, right? But personally, if you're suffering or you want to just be better for whatever reason, this is an incredibly profound thing to get. And then for the other people that just sort of get the sense that the world is overwhelming and there's a lot of complexity in what's going on, this is also the thing to get. Because, as I said, this is the seed for a whole different way of being a self. And then a whole different way of being a self is a whole different way of being a part of community and society at large. And this is ultimately how we just build, not utopia, not perfection, because the challenges of the world will keep being there to play with, but a much more functional, adaptive, capable, happy, individual and societal expression.
Yeah, well, another characteristic that we didn't quite call out, but I'll call it out right now, is it's like riding a bike.
Yeah.
It's once you know it, once you know how to do it, once you know of it, like you can't really unknow it, right? Once you've seen the origin of meaning, you can't pretend that it doesn't
Right.
exist
Right.
anymore. And so, I don't know, like insurance or a first aid kit in your closet, or whatever, the snowblower in your garage. We have a lot of tools in our life, and we have a lot of things that we hold close by in case, right? So that's kind of what I was just saying with
Yeah.
people that might be like, crushing it, because there's definitely different seasons of life,
Mm-hmm.
and there's definitely different struggles that we go through, and sometimes we don't need all the tools, and sometimes we really do. And when that time comes where we're like, I need an extra hand, if we don't, if we get 7 inches of snow dumped in the ground and we have no shovel or snowblower, that sucks. Because
Mm-hmm.
how are
Yeah.
you going to get your car out to go to the store and buy one, right? But
Yeah.
if you already have it, ready to go, then you're in a much better survival situation
Mm-hmm.
as, humans going forward. And that's, to have something like that where you're like, it's like riding a bike. It's like, once I, ring the bell, I can never unring the bell. I
Mm-hmm.
just have this thing now that's really, really special. But yeah,
Yeah.
maybe we should, I feel like we called out exactly what it is, but maybe we need to hit your third point and be more explicit. I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
I think, well, it's just, there's something called the curse of the expert, that like, once you know something, there's an assumption that when you're, that other people know it too. And the reality is that they don't. If they don't, right? Like, people that do, great. But like, those that don't are maybe listening for like, have they said it yet? Are they getting to it? Right. And so, and maybe that's because it's got parts. Like there's a concept of what we're talking about, which is understanding, okay, I've got all this meaning making going on. Then there's an experience of it, which could be as simple as, we have a program called Back to Breath. We also have Hacking Happy, those types of things where those illustrate how to move your attention out of thought and meaning making, and quite tangibly, like to start with, just your breath. It could be just your feet on the floor. It could be just the taste of a strawberry. It's something present, but experiencing that without thinking about it, right? That's an important distinction there. And that doesn't mean that when you first try that, let's say, right now, if they were to hit pause and actually just try to take 3 conscious breaths slowly. And what I mean by that is move your attention to the sensation of your breath and watch that for 3 breaths. Anybody who's never practiced that before, thoughts are going to pop up in those 3 breaths, right? So what we don't want to do is just immediately like shame ourselves about, oh, I'm thinking and I'm bad at this and all that stuff. That would just be more thinking, right? Instead, what we want to do is notice that there is a difference between the sensation and the thinking, and that there's an effort to drop the thinking to come back to the breath, okay? That is the very, very, very beginning of the shift. That is the move out of modeling or thinking or simulating in your thought and coming into this moment in a meaningful way. Now, if that's all it was, it'd be like, okay, I'll just go take a mindfulness thing and that's it. But what we need to then get as a deeper learning about this is that your ability to do that at any time has a value in it, because what you will see in the rest of your life is that your meaning making and your modeling and your thinking about stuff is so consistent and so loud and so in the background that the next time you get caught into an emotional situation you don't like, or overwhelm that you don't like, or whatever, you will see how stuck you are in that modeling, right? So that realization is like, oh, wait, what's the difference if I put this down, or I change my modeling, or I do whatever? And you start to gain agency and ability to not be attached to the suffering things that come up in your life in all directions in every way, right? So the simple part is, yes, it's just dropping thought, coming back into experience. But then the understanding about that is how foundational that is to all the meaning making in all the directions, right? What does, why do you feel anguish? Why do you feel sadness? Why do you feel fear? Why do you feel, all these things? And that you don't need to feel those in the same way. Why are you stuck in this worry about a party that's coming up? Why do you have to be fixated on making $1 million? All these different things. There is a way to leave the self that has been patterned to want and be attached in all these ways. And that freedom is profound.
Yeah, I mean, really, you can trace any kind of, we'll call it when you don't feel good, right? When you feel icky, whatever that is, from physical pain to anxiety to depression to anger to, worry to like literally anything that most of us are calling bad or something is probably directly tied to how attached to the perspective, the truth, the meaning that you have. And I don't know, just kind of to circle back to what I was saying before, it's not that there's not value in that, but there is what Rob calls degrees of mental freedom. If you can detach enough that there's room for other perspectives, other meaning makings, other thoughts, that is really transformative. And the only way to really do that authentically and kind of with your own agency is to be able to leave it completely, like Rob was saying. And I cannot wait to keep deep diving on this with you, because I have more questions, and we've been talking about this for forever, and I'm sure our listeners probably have more questions. If you ever wanted to reach out to us, definitely find us. We're kind of everywhere. So Spotify, YouTube, Facebook. If you want to talk about the fundamental shift and how you can get involved with it, you can email me personally. It's sarah@robscott.com. We love hearing from you. And Rob and I have kind of recommitted this year to really bringing this to you guys, like in the easiest, best, most powerful way possible, because we're just like, so, well, at least I should say, I'm just so lit up about it. I obviously know Rob is, because it's his business and he's dedicated a lot, his life to this. But I'm super pumped to be in this fundamental shift ride, and I can't wait to keep talking about it.
Yeah, that's awesome. So a quick little summary, right? We are very much lost in thought. We are lost in modeling the world in ways that we've been patterned to do. We don't often know that we're even doing that. And so the fundamental shift is this first kind of awakening that can be an experience, but then it can also reinform your attachment to all that meaning making going forward in a really different way. The position is presence, but it's also no self. It's also the immediate way to just move your attention away from whatever perspective or meaning making you're doing in the moment. And that allows you an infinite amount of mental freedom. It's the escape hatch out of suffering. It is the beginning of true wisdom, right? So all the ways that we're stuck, we're making bad meaning, the ways we're misinterpreting things, all that. This is the perspective that we need to take out of self, out of time, out of everything, to come back into those things with wisdom and with agency and with way more power. It is the fundamental shift. This is not special. It is available, and it's right here for everybody. In fact, last weird thing I'll say is there's no path to it. It is not 2 weeks away from now. It is actually right in this moment, any moment that you want. So it's more of a wake up rather than a path. But after that wake up, the grow up can be profound across the time of your life, and everything that's important to you. And it's really the seed to begin identity shifting, profoundly changing yourself and the patterns that you are, and the ways and your goals and purpose and all that stuff in a big, meaningful way. So I don't
And
know
if
if
you want to
that.
keep learning about, keep listening, Rob Scott Show. And if you want to kind of do the work and do some of the programs or work directly with Rob, head to robscott.com and you can get more info there.
You can get more info there. Thank you so much. Awesome to talk with you. We'll
All
be
right, we'll
back
talk
next
again
time.
soon.
All right. Bye-bye.